Welcome, everyone. Hour number one of Talkback for this Wednesday, January 21st, sponsored by Bitterroot Motors, doing it right for more than 42 years. Temp Ride Service, called Team Blue, 728-1111, and the Mustard Seed Restaurant. All right, big day here on Talkback this morning. Yesterday, of course, the sixth State of the Union address by President Barack Obama, and in the chamber last night was Montana Congressman Ryan Zinke, and we're privileged to have Congressman Zinke on the phone with us. Ryan, good morning, sir.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Hey, so what was your overall impression of being in the joint session of Congress with the Supreme Court and the cabinet and the whole 9 yards there to hear the president?
Well, I've never heard a president say he wants to work together, but mention veto so many times. And it was, when I'm listening to it, it was literally like free pizza night. I mean, everything, education, tax credits, healthcare, everything was free. But the only way to pay for it is more taxes, and we're back to the tax suspense. And so, there are a lot of areas that I think we do have in common. But certainly, when you come out of the chute and talking about, I'm going to veto everything. In your mind, the number one issue is climate change. Bear in mind, we're in a war. ISIS is expanding in influence and territory. The president refuses to say the word Islamic terrorist organization in together. And, obviously we have an Iran that's moving forward with their nuclear capability. So, am I concerned about climate change? I think we should all be concerned, but it's not a settled science. But there are issues, that are at the front lines, certainly securing our southern border, a number of things which evidently is not on this priority sheet.
Well, you said that you had never seen a president call for conciliation and issue so many vetoes at the same time. Washington Times agrees with you. They've got an article up right now called titled "Obama Sets a Record for Veto Threats in State of the Union Address." So you're certainly not alone on that front. One of the things I wanted to ask you, though, was, we're watching on TV back here at home in Montana, and some of the commentators were pointing out some things that happened in the crowd. First off, they said a lot of people had their cell phones. They heard beeps and chimes and all kinds of melodic sounds during the State of the Union. But there was also this moment during the speech, and Peter, if you could play it real quick. It's when Obama says he has no more campaigns left.
Okay, stand by. Hold on. I'm sorry.
And it sounded a little bit like this.
Stand by just a second. I'm sorry. I wish I. Oh, okay. No more campaigns.
No more campaigns.
There we go. So we'll get this on. Turn this up so Ryan can hear it. Here we go.
I have no more campaigns to run. My only agenda. I know, because I won both of them.
Wah, wah, wah.
I think it was the New York Times who called that the most pompous moment in a speech, in a State of the Union address. I just wanted to get your take on that whole moment, including from what I've heard. I wasn't there, but from what I've heard, it was the Republicans that were clapping when he said, "I have no more campaigns to run." Did you clap at that moment?
Well, I think what it indicates, he does have a quick wit, and so there was a round of applause after that, and then but he was quick witted, and I think he took it very well, on that. But what you should also remember that this last election, historic losses on his party's side for a reason. I don't think America agrees with the direction he's going. So
Now,
I think he took that humor. But what the areas that concerned me is that it was if you're on the far left, I think he was just playing to an audience of just simply a tax and spend policy that to me was outrageous. And he doesn't understand, the economics of a prosperous economy. I mean, yes, the economy is uneven about recovery, but yet he proclaims that his policies are working, but they've hurt the middle class the worst. And so there has to be a change in policy. What I think is an anchor of government is too intrusive in business, it's too intrusive in our lives, and small government works. And the American value of innovation and thinking out of the box, should reign supreme, and self-dependent, be independent, and not relying on government for all aspects of your life. I mean, that's the American value.
Was there anything, Ryan, that you found to be more egregious than any other? You said it was kind of like free pizza night. Well, was there any suggestion that he that he made that you just kind of rolled your eyes? I said, "Oh my goodness, where'd that come from?"
I never rolled my eyes because he is the president. I respect the office, and so I was cordial. I was polite, as I should be, as representing Montana. But to be in denial about what we face with ISIS, we face an ideology. It is Islamic radical ideology that wants to destroy the West and America. And I think the first step in combating, our enemy is to identify what it is. And using the term Islamic radical organizations, I think, is appropriate. And I'm not alone. And to say that we have ISIS on the run is clearly, looking through glasses that don't reflect reality. And, I do think that we're going to have a commitment. And this isn't a Republican or Democrat value. I mean, go back to John F. Kennedy, who was alive in my lifetime. And as an inaugural address, he said, we would pay any price, bear any burden in the defense of freedom. And yet, when it comes to ISIS, we're leading from behind or no-show in our foreign policy. I mean, when John Kerry shows up late to our oldest ally, and he shows up with James Taylor singing a song, I mean, our foreign policy should not be the subject of a Saturday Night Live skit.
I got to ask you this question because it's the line that sticks in everyone's mind. The State of the Union is. Now, President Obama said the State of the Union is strong. What would Ryan Zinke say?
I would say the State of the Union is strong because the American people are strong. So I agree with him is that American people are resilient, we're tough, and am I optimistic about the future? Absolutely. But the fundamentals of how to get there, I'm a blue-collar kid, 3 generations of plumbers, and I'm proud to be blue-collar. But creating opportunity about taking, keeping more of what you earned and not having the government breathing down your neck all the time, those are American values. And the government shouldn't be in a position of providing everything for everybody.
Now, Ryan, I was just going to say, I promised my buddy Monty Turner, who's also a vet, who works out in Mineral County, one of the hospitals, small hospitals out there. They've had some real problems with the VA. They had a big town meeting here last week where they touted this new choice card, where if there's too long a wait at the big VA hospitals, you could go to your local hospital and use this choice card and get the same care there. Well, he's had dozens and dozens of veterans in Mineral County calling his hospital saying, "I've got my choice card. I want to get treated. I meet all the qualifications. I'm ready to come in." And he has to say, "I'm sorry, we checked. The VA hasn't even put those in effect yet." And so it's really deeply frustrating for him as a hospital person to do that. These guys, they've got their cards, they've got the promise from the VA, but it's another no-show.
Well, and in the case of Lincoln, the VA, they're taking the distance, the qualifying distance, but with a crow fly. And if you know anything about Montana, we have mountains. Not every road is a direct route from rural Montana. And what's in and what's out. In my surprise, no, but we got to hold people accountable. And this is part of the problem with the VA is, there are a lot of really good people in the VA, but when you have, 240,000 or so employees and the labor contract is over 800 pages, and just throwing money at the system is not going to fix it. Innovation, reward out of the box thinking, and transform the VA to what it is, to what it should be, and that involves some flexibility at the local level. If there's a hiccup, if there's a long line, then allow some flexibility and empower the VA folks to do the right thing.
Sure.
But this Washington one size fits all model. It doesn't work when it comes to rural Montana, and the view from the Potomac is a lot different than the view from the Yellowstone or the Flathead or the Clark Fork.
Hey, Ryan, we've got a couple of calls here. Let's get them in because we're only happy for 15 minutes. I want to squeeze every moment we can out of that. So, Russ, you're on with Ryan Zinke. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Zinke.
Good morning, Russ.
Thank you for being on Talkback this morning. I would like to throw some criticism at you, but I'm sure you can handle it.
I can handle it. Go ahead.
And I would, if there's a way to interpret this to where it's constructive, please take it that way. I'm not very eloquent, but that's what I'm shooting for.
I've been shot at before. Go for it.
Very disappointed that you voted for the House Speaker Boehner. You, as being a former Navy SEAL, if I'm not mistaken, you know how to deal with bad guys, and supporting them is not the way to deal with bad guys.
Yeah. Oh, Russ, let me explain what happened to the vote, so you know.
One more thing, if I may, and then I promise I'll listen to you.
Okay, go ahead. Real quickly, Russ. Real quick. Go ahead.
Diplomacy is going to be the demise of freedom in America. Please think on that.
All right. Thanks for the call. So
the vote for Boehner was interesting. That was the first vote that I took in the Senate. It was a roll call vote, so I was last because my name's in the Z. And there was a Republican caucus in November, which was decided almost unanimously for the Speaker. And then we get to the vote on the House floor. Now, Louis Gohmert, who I know and I like a lot, he received 3 votes. Colin Powell received 1, Rand Paul received 1, and Webster received 12. So the only decision was between Pelosi and Speaker Boehner. That's what the decision was when it came to Ryan Zinke, and that choice was clear. Now I will say this: if the Speaker Boehner does not perform the task, given that he has said that what we need is the Senate, that we American people gave him the Senate, we improved the numbers in the House. If he doesn't perform the task, there will be another vote, and there will be a leadership shakeup. Now, the leadership team, I think Scalise and McCarthy are spot on. I think both of them are good thinkers and very conservative. But I would say if the Speaker does not deliver, then there will be another vote, and the votes may be a lot different than the first one.
Okay,
so
now
we on the Speaker.
Okay,
I appreciate the comment.
We have a Facebook comment. So
that's right, and I would just say personally, I think you're giving them more credit than maybe they deserve. If it were me and I was in the House, I would have said, "Sure, guys, I would consider voting you. Why didn't you tell us a month or two ago when we had the big confab?"
And I didn't know Webster. I had to Google Daniel Webster because I thought, given that Colin Powell was nominated, that they were appointing some historical figure. So I've never met Daniel Webster in my life.
You can look him up in the dictionary, I think, right?
You had to look him up in Google while the vote is proceeding.
All right. So
Susie on Facebook says, I thought that the speech was an appeal for more cooperation. But the only thing that matters to the Republicans are taxes. Plain and simple. If the president was a Republican with the economy the way it is now, he would be a hero. What do you think, Ryan?
Well, let's look at the economy. More people are out of the job market than anything before. So the unemployment rates are down. Yes, but that's payroll. In Montana, I asked, the independent duty contractors and people, is it better taking credit over low gas prices when an administration does everything they can to shut down fossil fuels? Take it for what it's worth. I don't think the economy is great. I think we still have an enormous federal debt. I think the stock market is rising as a result, not in total, but as a result also of the Fed system dumping in $80 billion a month, which makes the bond prices really low. And I think the economy's mixed. I mean, for the top 10%, 1%, the economy's great. So whose policy is that? Is it the Republican policy? No. And for average America, blue collar, are we better off? I'd say it's very, very mixed.
Tell you what,
we can do better by getting the government out of the way.
Okay, Ryan, we got to get one more call because we only got you for 15 minutes. We're almost out of time. So, Tyler, real quick, what's your question?
Well, I wanted to touch on those cards you guys brought up.
Yeah, the choice card.
Yeah, I know a guy who lives in Missoula. He got one about 3 months prior. I just got mine a couple weeks ago. The problem that the veterans have is that we don't believe that the government's good for the money. The guy that I know is the same guy that I brought on Talkback to share his story about how the VA just totally tore him up.
I remember, yeah.
He refuses to use the card because he doesn't want to get held on the hook for whatever he ends up using it for, and I'm the same way.
Well, even if you tried to use it right now, it doesn't sound like they're letting you. So.
You can't because they haven't been activated.
It's funny money at this point.
Yeah.
So, but how do you think, Ryan? How do you think that you guys, the newly elected Congress, can help fix the trust that the veterans have in the system and the government? Because there is none.
All right, thanks. So, real quick, Ryan, I know we only have it for another minute. Go ahead.
Well, I do think there's an oversight committee that we need to hold the VA's feet to the fire, because a lot of it is when the government says something, we want to ensure the government follows through with truth. So, I was pleased that the government card was that program was put in existence. Do I think there's hiccups? There's no doubt there's hiccups because I read every email, and monitor the calls that come in the office. So there's a lot of issues with it. But if the government says something, then they need to hold true and make sure that we hold them accountable and hold elected officials accountable. Me too.
All right.
And I enjoyed the conversation with Russ because I got to stand before the citizens of Montana and justify my votes, what I'm doing, and listen. So I get it.
All right, Ryan, we deeply appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. And one more quick question. I was curious about this. Where was Hillary Clinton seated, if you happen to know?
I did not see Hillary Clinton at all.
Okay. I was wondering if she was even there. So, I was just curious. All right. Well, I just threw that out there just for fun. All right, Ryan, Congressman Zinke, thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to visiting with you again.
And likewise, God bless America.
Thank you, sir. All right, that's Congressman Ryan Zinke from his Washington office. Now, we're way overdue. We're like 10 minutes way overdue on a break here. Of course, the engineer in me is freaking out. So we'll take a quick break, come right back, and talk more about this in a moment. 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. Yeah! John King's over there. I'm Peter Christian, and we are rocking, baby. All right, so.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting, everybody approaches the State of the Union with their own biases, right?
Right.
So as Sue was pointing out, if it was a Republican president and the economy was this way, you'd be cheering for him, and vice versa. Well, one of the things that's interesting is every once in a while they get these, the pollsters will get a bunch of people in a room.
Yeah, focus group.
A focus group, and they separate them out, Republicans and Democrats, self-described. And then they each have a little clicker. So when they hear something they like, they give it a plus. If they hear something they don't like, they give it a minus. So you can kind of see through the speech when they like something. For example, in that speech, the focus group I was watching, when he started talking about taking down terrorism and fighting it, both groups, Republicans and Democrats, went through the roof.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah.
Lots of support for him.
Right.
Way past the baseline. But there was a really interesting thing that happened earlier on in the speech when the president says the State of the Union is strong and goes on and to describe why it's strong about the health of the economy and everything like that. Both Republicans and Democrats, there's a crash. It goes from being middle line to towards the bottom of the screen. Republicans go further down than Democrats, but both of them drop about 20 points. So anyway, I thought I'd play this little clip. This is Frank Luntz. He's the pollster that's running the focus group while the speech is going on, and they're responding afterwards.
Keep in mind, this is on Fox News, right?
It's in the Kelly file.
Kelly file, yeah. Okay, here we go.
I love it that we get to start with the American people rather than the politicians or pundits. So, word or phrase, describe what you saw tonight with the president's speech.
Same old Obama.
Same speech.
Pedantic.
A challenge for the Republicans to do better.
Disappointingly contradictory.
Groundhog Day with a retread of the same old lies and broken promises.
Hopeful.
So I want a show of hands. How many of you voted for Barack Obama but were still disappointed in today's speech? So we got 5 of you. I'm just curious, why are you disappointed?
Well, he didn't really cover any of the domestic issues that are really affecting our country. I just think he was filling it with a lot of clapping and stories, just, talking a lot but not really talking about anything.
Well, he did open up the speech, and I want to go to a clip. At the very beginning, when he talks about the state of America, this did not test that well. Let's take a look.
America, for all that we have endured, for all the grit and hard work required to come back, for all the tasks that lie ahead, know this: the shadow of crisis has passed, and the State of the Union is strong.
The State of the Union is strong, and almost none of you agreed with that. Why is he wrong?
There was a recent poll that was published that suggested that 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So that would contradict what the president is saying tonight. At the same time, at the top of the hour, Megyn Kelly pointed out that Yemen is in the process of falling, and yet the president seems to think that his policies are effective on terrorism.
We know that unemployment is down. We know that the economy is getting stronger. Why don't you believe the State of the Union is strong?
Well, for starters, because I look at what's happening to my savings, and I look at what's happening overall with the people around me, and it's harder for people to make a living. It's harder for people to go to the grocery store, for example, and buy things, notwithstanding China. And, I mean, there's very little that we seem to be able to do based upon politics to fix this.
Quick question. How many of you believe that Washington, in general, and President Obama understand you, understand your life, understand your concerns? Raise your hands. Not one of you. Half of you voted for him, and not one of you believe that he understands you.
Wow. Not one? How many people were in that group?
Well, if I were a Republican or a Democrat, I would respond the same way, wouldn't you? Does Washington understand you? Heck no. It's a discombobulated thing far away that pays almost no attention to me except for when I'm in trouble.
We'll take a break. Come right back. 721-1290, 1-800-568-530. Now, we are going to shift gears here. Visiting with Melissa Hornbein here in a few minutes, the Flathead Water Rights Compact Committee, and she's going to be telling us basically what went into the current compact that is now before the Montana legislature. Plenty of opinions for and against. So we hope to figure that out and get more with Melissa. She's on the phone right now. We'll get her on right after this commercial break. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. Thanks so much for joining us. And joining us on the telephone right now, Melissa Hornbein, who is, I want to make sure I've got your title right. You are the staff attorney for the Compact Commission, is that correct?
Yes, the Montana Reserved Water Rights Compact Commission.
All right. So first of all, welcome to the show. We've been wanting to have you on for quite some time. And I know that here in Missoula County, we do have somewhat some to do with the Flathead Water Rights Compact, and that stands before the legislature right now. We're not in Lake County or Flathead County where there's very, very deep concern and involvement. But if you could just kind of walk us through, first of all, what exactly is this compact And what will it decide if it's voted on positively by the legislature?
So what this compact is a settlement of existing water rights by the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. You know, a lot of people think that we enter into negotiations with the tribes because we feel nice and we want to give them water rights. That's not the case. We have been told by both the U.S. Supreme Court and the Montana Supreme Court that these, what are called federal reserved or tribal reserved water rights, do exist as a matter of law, and that it is the duty of the states in which they exist to quantify them for the tribes. And if the states don't proactively do that, if they don't go through that quantification process, then it'll get done for them in federal litigation. So we had a very far-sighted legislature back in 1979. They decided that they wanted these water rights quantified in a state forum rather than in federal court. And they thought it would be better if they could be quantified not through litigation at all, but through negotiated settlement. And the reason for that is that these types of water rights generally have very early priority dates. Montana is a prior appropriation state, meaning that the user who is first in time is first in right. They get to satisfy their entire water right before what is called a junior user can satisfy theirs. So what that means is that with these tribal water rights, federal reserved water rights that are associated with a federal reservation of land, they have a priority date, a date of use, that is either the date of the reservation itself, which in the case of the CSKT predates statehood, it's July 16th of 1855, or what is called time immemorial. And that date, that Aboriginal date, is associated with traditional tribal uses of water, for example, involving fisheries and hunting, things like that. So we have these very early priority date water rights. They have not been quantified, and so the compact is the document that does that. It puts numbers on the water rights. It does so in a way that protects existing uses to the greatest extent possible, and in exchange for that, the tribes agree to relinquish all other claims to water within the state of Montana.
Now, so which date are we using? Are we using the reservation creation date, or are we using time immemorial?
Both. So what the courts have told us is that for tribes for which there is treaty language that does two things. It both reserves land from the public domain to create the Indian reservation for what are called consumptive uses for things like agriculture, irrigation, domestic, commercial, municipal, and industrial uses. Those types of uses get the priority date of the reservation. For traditional uses, and if the treaty language talks about things like traditional hunting and fishing grounds, those types of uses get the time immemorial priority date. And what the U.S. Supreme Court has said is the rationale for that is that those types of historic Aboriginal uses were not created and given by the U.S. government. They were reserved by the tribes when they ceded the rest of their Aboriginal territory to the United States.
Now, this may sound like a silly question, but you're an attorney and you know how words can be used. So when you say hunting and fishing rights, we're really just talking about fishing and hunting, right? Or is there more to it there?
Well, so with regard to these tribes in particular, as well as 14 other tribes that have what are called Stevens Treaties, they're treaties that were negotiated by Isaac Stevens, who was one of the early territorial governors of Washington and Montana territories. Those treaties have language in them speaking to the tribe's exclusive right to the use of waters of the reservation for fisheries, and their right in common with the citizens of the territory to the access of off-reservation waters in their traditional use areas, what is called in the treaty language all usual and accustomed places, to use those waters for fisheries purposes.
So in the treaty, it also says for citizens that are living in the area that are not part of the tribe, that they would have equal access?
Yes. So, and this is something that's created a lot of question and a lot of concern, and understandably so. What Article 3 of the Hellgate Treaty says about off-reservation use, in other words, use off of the reservation in the tribe's usual and accustomed places, is that the tribes have that right in common with the citizens of the territory. Well, if you're just reading that as an ordinary reader would, you would think that that means the same right that you or I have to go and access fishing areas, streams, and rivers for the purposes of fishing anywhere within the state of Montana, meaning that for you and I, those are public areas. Those are areas that we can access under the laws of the state. We can't cross someone's private property without permission to access those areas. Well, what the U.S. Supreme Court has said is that that language doesn't mean the same thing for the tribes as it does for you and I. They have said that for the tribes, it conveys to them essentially an easement across private land to access their traditional fishing grounds. It conveys, in the case of the Washington tribes, a right to a harvestable share of the commercial fishery, up to 50% of the fishery. So that in common with language, while it seems to imply an equal right, the U.S. Supreme Court has told us it is not, in fact, an equal right, because we have to interpret the treaty language, first of all, as the tribes at the time would have interpreted it, and secondly, we have to interpret it in favor of the tribes. So there are some heavy, what are called rules of construction or canons of construction that apply to treaties and that are favorable to tribes.
Has the U.S. Supreme Court actually looked at the Hellgate Treaty in particular, or are you basing this on language in other Stevens treaties that they've looked at?
Okay, tell you what, we're going to answer that when we come back. We've got a great break coming up. I'm sorry, but we do have two lines open. If you'd like to visit with Melissa Hornbein, this is a lady that knows this compact inside and out. She helped draft it, put it together. So if you have any questions or comments or agreements or disagreements, this is the time. But someone who really knows what she's talking about is here, and would love to visit with you. We'll be right back. This is Talk Back for Wednesday, January 21st, right here on KGVO. And I'm Peter Christian. That's John King, our show producer, on the phone right now. Melissa Hornbein is joining us. Now, unfortunately, I had to jump in there to take a quick commercial break there, Melissa. So would you mind answering John's question, please?
Yes, and I'm very sorry. Can you remind me of what the question was?
What's your question again, John?
Yeah, I was asking. We're mentioning Supreme Court rulings, and my question was: has the U.S. Supreme Court touched this Hellgate Treaty or the Stevens Treaty here in Montana, or are your anticipations of what they might rule here in Montana based off of similar Stevens treaties in other parts of the country? You would mention Washington State. That's why I brought that up.
Sure, and that's a great question. The U.S. Supreme Court has not interpreted the Treaty of Hellgate. Various federal district courts in Montana, as well as the Ninth Circuit, have looked specifically at this treaty. But you raise an important point, because the U.S. Supreme Court actually has not had to decide the issue of whether this right to hunt and fish in common with the citizens of the territory actually carries with it a time immemorial right to a water right to in-stream flows off of the reservation. They have affirmed a decision in the case of the Klamath tribes, which was not a Stevens Treaty tribe but had similar language regarding on-reservation rights, that those rights do carry a time immemorial water right on the reservation, and partially based on that case, the Ninth Circuit held in the case of the CSKT that they do have on-reservation in-stream flow water rights with a time immemorial priority date. It is an area of great uncertainty for the state of Montana as to whether that, in common with language, also carries an off-reservation in-stream flow water right. From our perspective, looking at this situation, we had to take into account the rules of construction I referred to before, which are favorable to the tribes, and the potential risks of the tribes filing potentially thousands of claims off of the reservation, both west and east of the Continental Divide. The choice we made as part of this negotiated settlement process was to recognize a very limited number of off-reservation claims, heavily conditioned to protect existing uses in exchange for the tribe's agreement to give up all of their other claims within the state of Montana off the reservation.
So what you're saying is, sorry, go ahead.
Why would the tribe do that? Why would they agree to do it if they have the prior use right there in the treaty? Why would they give that up? I mean, if that's what they wanted, they could just I don't want to use this term pejoratively, but they could thumb their nose at the rest of the world and say, that's our water. You guys can just, forget it.
Absolutely, and that represents a real risk for the state. On the flip side, the tribes have a risk because, as I mentioned, the U.S. Supreme Court has not ruled on this issue, that they might suffer an adverse ruling. And even if they don't, they have to go through the entire state water court adjudication process and any appellate process after that in order to establish the nature and extent of those rights. So there is risk, money, and extensive time involved for both the state and the tribes in the litigation of these claims, regardless of the end result, whether the answer is yes or the answer is no as to whether these claims exist. So I think that, and again, I can't speak for the tribes, but I think that for them, the symbolic recognition of a limited number of these rights, especially in areas where they had strong Aboriginal use, traditional fisheries use, it was worthwhile in this negotiated settlement context to accept that in exchange for forgoing the rest of their claims, simply because of the risks, the time, and the money involved in litigation. For the state, on the other side of the coin, it was worthwhile to recognize a limited number of these rights in a way that protects existing uses, so that we wouldn't have to go through that protracted, expensive, and lengthy litigation process.
Okay, let's get Robert on the phone, who has a question for you. Robert, you're on with Melissa Hornbein. Hi.
Hi. Good morning, and thank you.
You need to turn your radio down.
Yes.
Please.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're getting feedback from me.
Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, Melissa, I know from going to the meetings for about 10 years that you guys have spent probably 99% of your time talking to the tribe, and I doubt if you spent 1% of the time talking to the citizens of the area. In the meetings, you guys would talk for 2 hours and give the citizens 3 minutes apiece to try to talk, which was impossible. And then you're not looking at the fact that when the reservation was created, the Indians were allotted land and given, their deeds to the land and stuff. And then the surplus land that was there, the federal government, by presidential proclamation, sold that excess land to people like my predecessors and give us deeds and water rights and everything. And now you want to take them away and throw us under the bus and give them to the tribe and the state or to other people to control it for us. And it's violating our constitutional rights, Montana and the federal constitutional rights. And then you also say that they've got a right to go fishing and hunting at their usual places. Well, in other words, then that's also violating the trespass rights and, again, the people of the state of Montana. And also their inflow stream points that they're setting them high up on the mountains so that most all the water in western Montana will be owned by them.
Okay, tell you what, Robert, we're up against a commercial break. I want to give Melissa plenty of time to answer your points. So can you hang on?
You bet.
Okay, and so Melissa will get you on in just a moment. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Talk back is rolling. 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. Melissa Hornbein joining us this morning, and we're talking about the Flathead, the water rights compact, and Robert's also on the line. Let me make sure I got it back there. Now, would you address some of Robert's points, please? Until I think we have a hard break coming up in about 4 minutes, so might have to continue this, but go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through Robert's points in the order that he raised them, and hopefully I'll address them all. The first one was the issue of public involvement, and first of all, I'd like to apologize if you feel that the public involvement has not been sufficient on this issue. In addition to the formal negotiation sessions and public meetings, which, as you pointed out, just because of the massive number of folks who want to comment, we do generally limit public comment to one comment per person, and 3 minutes per person. I have spent many hours of the last 2 years meeting with any group or individual on the reservation or off who wants to invite me to come talk. And I would like to extend that invitation to you as well. We have spoken with a lot of irrigators, non-irrigators, city and county government, things like that, both on and off of the reservation, and I'm always happy to do that. So I definitely want you to feel like you have the ability to get your questions answered. The next point that you brought up was with regard to, and I this was my interpretation, so if I have this wrong, please correct me, but the issue of the fact that the reservation was allotted through the 1904 and 1908 allotment acts, and I think what you were getting at was that it was perhaps thereby diminished because the lands that were not allotted were opened up to homesteading, and the lands that were allotted in many cases have passed into non-tribal fee ownership. And so I think what you were getting at was, doesn't that somehow diminish the reservation or the tribe's rights associated with the reservation? And this whole process is based on existing federal law that the state is required to comply with. I didn't make it up. And what the courts have told us, what the federal courts have told us, is that the 1904 and 1908 allotment acts did not diminish the reservation, and they specifically told us that in a case called Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes versus Naaman. And in that case, the court held that despite the fact that the reservation had been opened up to allotment and homesteading, the body of the reservation still existed, and the rights associated with the reservation of land were not diminished. In particular, the court held in that case that the tribes owned all of the southern half of Flathead Lake. So, we just have to go on existing federal law as to whether the reservation has been diminished or not, and what the courts have told us is that it has not been. And that absent a termination of the reservation itself, for example, similar to what happened in the Klamath Reservation in Oregon, the reservation continues to exist and the rights associated with it do as well. Your next point, I think, was a claim that the compact takes water rights from existing water rights owners on the reservation and therefore is a violation of the 5th and 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and also of the Montana Constitution. Those rights that you refer to, and you specifically point out the rights that were perhaps provided to individuals who came in either under an allotment or under the Homestead Act and were given patents to both land and water, yes. Unless those rights were actually filed in the Montana statewide general stream adjudication, you don't have a valid water right. And
okay.
that's
and I'm sorry, and with that, I apologize to both of you. And John also is holding. We're up against a hard break here. We're going to take our top of the hour break, but we have another hour to talk about this. So don't fear. We'll continue. Melissa will be back with us after the top of the hour. So thanks for joining us here on Talkback. Welcome back to Talkback, brought to you by Bitterroot Motors, doing it right for more than 42 years. Team Blue Temp Ride Service, call 728-1111, and also by the Mustard Seed Restaurant. Okay, we've been talking the Flathead Water Rights Compact the last half hour. We've got a whole other hour to go, and we want to say thank you to Melissa Hornbein, an attorney who is, as far as I know, you're not billing us for this time, are you, Melissa?
Unfortunately, I don't have billable hours, so you're safe. I'm a public servant.
Okay.
When you ask an attorney if they're billing you and they laugh, that's usually not a good sign, but I think we're on safe ground here.
All right. Now, what I wanted to do is Robert, I've kept you on quite a while, and there are other folks who want to get in. So if you have one more question, you could ask Melissa, and then we'll let you go and let other folks talk with her. So go ahead.
Yes. Okay, Melissa. Yeah, you said that there were several court decisions that will not allow them to diminish the size of the reservation. And if that's true, we also, the people that was sold the land, have the same rights in common with the tribe. If you read that, it give the tribe the same rights to hunt and fish in common with citizens of the territory. And as far as the Naaman Act goes, that's Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Anyone that's ever been in law enforcement or around law knows that that's the same court that took your right to say prayer in school. They're the most liberal court in the United States, and they're a laugh. So you guys should take it to U.S. Supreme Court, and it would cost you half as much money as you've already spent trying to negotiate this. And I do thank you.
Okay, thanks, Robert. So real quick, Melissa, what do you think?
Well, thanks for the questions, Robert, and I would encourage him to contact me. He can find me on our website if he wants to discuss more of these questions. I didn't get to all of them. Specifically with regard to I think he was referring to the treaty language that speaks of rights of fishing in common with the citizens of the territory. Those are specifically the off-reservation rights. He had mentioned that allowing the tribes to access private land under that treaty provision is a violation of private property and a trespass right. We've actually been told by the U.S. Supreme Court that that is not the case. The tribes do have access across private land. With regard to on-reservation rights, the tribes have, under the treaty, the exclusive right to the use of waters of the reservation under the treaty. So while I understand and sympathize with his views about the Ninth Circuit, unfortunately we are within the Ninth Circuit and we do have to comply with the law as it is interpreted by that court.
Now, what about his point? Yes, the Ninth Circuit's going to rule this way, but go up higher, go up to the Supreme Court, and you'll get a different ruling.
Sure. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, the tribes would, if they file their claims, which is the alternative to this negotiated settlement, the alternative is not the status quo. The tribes will either file their claims or they will have the settlement, which will describe their claims as a matter of state law. If the tribes file their claims, they're likely to file many thousands of claims both on and off of the reservation. The state would be responsible for litigating and defending state interests. In other words, water rights associated with state-owned land or state-owned water rights. The state would not be able or have the legal duty to defend individual water rights. That burden would fall on the individual water users. It would cost a great deal more likely than the settlement to litigate it all the way up to the Supreme Court, assuming the Supreme Court would accept the case, and it would take many years to do. So from the state's perspective, this compact contains many provisions to protect existing uses. It also recognizes tribal water rights as we're required to do under federal law. So we chose that compromise approach. However, if the legislature rejects it and if they are advised by their constituents to reject it, we will find out what the adjudication looks like, and ultimately it may go to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And both of those are viable ways to proceed.
Okay, let's get John on the line. He's been waiting. John, thanks for holding. You're on Talk Back with Melissa Hornbein. Hi.
Yeah, hi. Appreciate the time. I had a question for Melissa, or several questions, but primarily my questions surround the event of a violation of this compact and the process that would happen. And I'm concerned about my ability to have a meaningful trial or hearing.
Now, are you talking about if you are charged with a violation of the compact, or if the tribe violates the compact?
If I were to be.
Okay.
So can I throw out a scenario and see if this is what you're asking? You're saying, let's pretend you're a landowner and you're not getting the amount of water you thought you would be allotted, and you want to contest that. Is your concern that you won't be able to get a fair hearing on that contestation?
Well, my contestation would be this, that they, the tribe, or this new body, the Law of Administration and the the Administration Board, would come to me and say that I'm in violation of, say, for instance, not registering an existing well.
Oh, okay.
So now I'm forced into a hearing or a trial, and I'm forced to defend myself, and my concern is my ability to gain and maintain a meaningful trial. And so my concern is jurisdiction.
And the verdict is in on the trial, contestation, not a word, contestation.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, listen, I tell you what, Melissa, if you don't mind answering that question after we come back from our break, okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, and John, thanks for your call. We'll get Melissa to answer that for you. JR is coming up. We have one line open. Oh, there it goes. Started
And
ringing.
we have Facebook questions.
And we have Facebook questions. So everybody wants Melissa's an instant rock star here on Talkback. We'll be right back. So if John gets a little bit sleepy here in the next few minutes, we'll know what happened. All right, 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Joining us this morning, Melissa Hornbein, and she's an attorney with the Water Rights Compact. And now, John had some questions regarding what would happen if he were brought to some sort of administrative court for a violation of this newly established compact. How would he be represented? How could he make sure that he gets adequate representation and gets a fair hearing?
Sure, and I'm actually going to use the example that John provided before the break. I do want to set the context a little bit here, and I think that John is clear on this, but I want to make sure that your listeners are as well. My understanding is that he is on the reservation, and he's talking about the Unitary Management Ordinance and the Water Management Board that would be in place on the reservation if the compact is passed by the legislature.
That's correct, yeah.
So under the UMO and the Water Management Board, and in the situation that John described where, for example, what if he didn't register an existing use? Would the Water Management Board be able to essentially come after him and enforce his failure to register, and then where would that go from there? So the first issue is the only existing uses that are required to be registered are currently unregistered uses of the tribal water right. So many individual allottees or what we call individual Indian owners, owners of tribal land who irrigate or otherwise use water on that land, many of those uses are not currently registered under state or tribal law. There is a registration requirement under the compact for those types of uses. In addition, there is an optional registration ability for certain uses, specifically smaller domestic and stock uses, that are the types of uses that are exempt from permitting under existing state law. But because of a 1996 Montana Supreme Court case, the DNRC, the state of Montana, has not had any jurisdiction over water rights on the reservation since 1996. The result is that a number of people have drilled small domestic wells or put in smaller stock uses that would be exempt under state law, except there's no registration or what is called a certificate of completion process for those types of uses for the last 18 years. The compact provides the ability to register those uses and to get a priority date for them, and therefore to have an enforceable water right for those types of uses. Those people do not currently have an enforceable water right. However, that process is optional. The Water Management Board is not going to come after someone who doesn't register that type of use. So there's no situation in which the board would go out and affirmatively enforce something. The UMO, as it was negotiated by the parties, is based very heavily on the Montana Water Use Act. And the way the Montana Water Use Act works with regard to enforcement is that there has to be a complaint. For example, between water users, your neighbor calls and says, my neighbor is using more than his legal amount of water, or he's using it improperly. And so then the DNRC comes out and investigates. That's the same way it would work if the compact is passed and the reservation is under what is called the Law of Administration or the Unitary Management Ordinance, which is a joint state-tribal set of laws that would apply only on the reservation. So those are the types of situations where enforcement would occur just as they do now.
Well, now, quickly, how would he be represented, though? Would he have to represent himself? Would he have to hire an attorney? What?
So basically the way it would work is that under the body that administers the Unitary Management Ordinance is the Water Management Board. It is a 5-member board with 2 members appointed by the governor in consultation with the county commissions for counties on the reservation, 2 members appointed by the tribal council, and the 5th appointed by the other 4. That board serves as the DNRC on the reservation. They are the administrative body. So if he is, for example, in a contested case hearing before the board, he has a disagreement with his neighbor, as I described earlier, the board will ultimately render a decision on that case. And the area of primary concern that people usually voice is, well, what if their neighbor or the person they're in a dispute with is a tribal member, they're not a tribal member, they're concerned about equal representation. The administrative body, as I mentioned, is a joint state tribal board. However, if John gets an adverse ruling from the Water Management Board, he can appeal that ruling to a court of competent jurisdiction. So he has his day in court, just like a user off of the reservation. If they get an adverse decision from the DNRC at an administrative level, they can appeal that decision to a court.
Okay, we have some Facebook comments and questions. First up, this one's from Claire. She says, how is the CSKT compact different from the other Montana tribal compacts? And specifically, how will the CSKT compact impact 11 southwestern Montana counties?
Sure. So we have 6 other tribal compacts that have been ratified by the legislature for the 6 other reservations in the state of Montana. No one of those compacts is identical with another, just as none of the 11 federal compacts we've negotiated with federal agencies, none of them are the same as the other. They have similarities, as this one does, but each one is unique because of the reservation of land, the document creating that reservation, and the surrounding hydrologic circumstances. I think one of the things that can distinguish this compact, or 2 of the things really that can distinguish this compact from the 6 other tribal compacts, is first of all, it does recognize a limited number of off-reservation rights. As I mentioned earlier in the hour, that is due to Article 3 of the Treaty of Hellgate. None of the other tribes in the state of Montana have a Stevens Treaty or have similar Article 3 language as these tribes do. So that's the reason for that difference. The second reason is this shared administration, unitary administration that we were just talking about in response to John's question. All of the other compacts with other tribes have what is called dual administration. The state oversees state-based water rights on the reservation, and the tribes oversee the tribal water rights on the reservation. In most of our other tribal compacts, the compact itself has resulted in a basin closure. In other words, you can't get a new permit for appropriation because all of the water is quantified as a result of the compact. Under those compacts, if non-tribal water users on the reservation want to get a new permit, they have to go to the tribal government and go through the tribal permitting process to obtain one. This compact does not involve a basin closure. There has been a regulatory void, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, on the reservation for the last 18 years. Under the shared administration approach, there's a system that parallels existing state law, and people would have the ability to get new permits and new uses, and the state of Montana thereby retains a role in new permitting and new uses on the reservation. The second part of her question was, how does this affect the 11 counties west of the Continental Divide in Montana? And, the answer is different for every county. For example,
how about Missoula?
Missoula is a really good case in point because it's off of the reservation, but it is affected by one of the water rights quantified under the compact, and that is the former Milltown Dam water right. As I mentioned earlier in the hour, the compact is basically a compromise. It's a negotiated settlement, and under that settlement, the state agreed to recognize a limited number of off-reservation rights that are conditioned to protect existing uses in exchange for the tribes giving up the rest of their claims. The Milltown right is a prime example of that compromise because it's a water right that the state actually obtained as part of the natural resource damages settlement with ARCO and the Northwestern Corporation over the Butte Opportunity Superfund site. And we obtained that water right, but under the terms of the settlement, we were required to administer it as a non-consumptive use. In other words, as an in-stream flow water right. So without the compact in place, that water right will have to go through the DNRC change process. It will be administered as a non-consumptive in-stream flow water right at the confluence of the Blackfoot and Clark Fork rivers. Currently, that water right has a 2,000 cubic foot per second priority date or amount of water 365 days a year with a 1911 priority date. Under the compact, the tribes have agreed to shared ownership with that water right with the state of Montana, maintaining the same priority date and with a much lower minimum flow rate, 1,200 CFS versus 2,000, and a bunch of other conditions that protect existing users. So that's the main impact on the Missoula area, is that water right, which is going to exist with or without the compact.
Okay, we're going to take a break, and JR and Paul will get you on here in a moment. Great answers to these questions. Melissa Hornbein joining us. The question I wanted to ask, hopefully we'll get this done before the top of the hour, is there are some that are afraid that the water that we use from this wonderful aquifer that lies beneath Missoula, that somehow may be in danger of being abrogated by the tribes through this treaty, and that we'll end up here in Missoula having to pay for the water we're already paying for. You know what I mean? So we're going to come right back with more of Talk Back in a moment. Oh, we're having a great time on Talkback this morning. We are learning a lot, and we appreciate the expertise that Melissa Hornbein is bringing to us as an attorney working with the Water Rights Compact. So let's get right to the phones, as we promised we would. And JR, you are on with Melissa. Please go ahead, sir.
Hi, Melissa. I got in late, so I'm not sure if you already answered this question. In the other 6 tribal compacts, the specific number of acre feet awarded each tribe was brought out, and we were told the exact number. In this compact, I asked somebody on the commission how many millions of acre feet are being awarded, and I was told to go to the 1,000 pages of appendices and figure it out myself. And I would like to know from you a number, either give me a number or say you don't know the number, how many millions of acre feet are being awarded.
Sure, JR, and that's a good question, and no one has raised that one yet. So I'm going to give you probably a typical lawyer answer. In other words, I'm not going to give you a yes or no answer. The other compacts that we've negotiated with, I think 2 exceptions, do not have a single number for the quantified water right. Certainly, this is also true for the federal compacts we've negotiated with federal agencies. There is not a single water right, nor is there a single number that represents the total amount of water. And the reason for that is that most of the compacts we negotiate, both with the tribes and the federal government, include what are called both consumptive and non-consumptive uses. Consumptive uses are for things like irrigation or municipal uses that can actually be quantified in terms of the amount of water that is taken out of the hydrologic system. Non-consumptive uses, and this compact is an especially good example of that because so many of the quantified rights are for in-stream flows, are exactly that. They're water that never comes out of the stream, never leaves the hydrologic system. And the problem with quantifying those in terms of volume, in other words, in terms of acre feet or some other volumetric measurement of water, as opposed to quantifying them in terms of a flow rate, the amount of cubic feet per second that pass a specific point on a stream, is that they vary over the course of the year. And particularly true in this compact for the in-stream flow rights, an in-stream flow right that is satisfied at one point on a stream, that requirement of, for example, 10 CFS in the stream, 10 cubic feet per second, not only satisfies that right, but satisfies any downstream in-stream flow or consumptive use water right that requires the same 10 CFS of water. If you have 2 in-stream flow water rights on a stream, which in the case of this compact, there are streams that have more than one in-stream flow water right on a given within different reaches of the stream. So say you have one for 10 CFS and downstream another for 20 CFS, that doesn't add up to a total of 30 CFS. It adds up to a total of 20 CFS because the first 10 satisfies both the first right and the second right. And that's a very sort of roundabout way of saying that it's very difficult to add up the numbers associated with both non-consumptive in-stream flow rights and consumptive use water rights that are quantified in volume and come to an accurate number. You end up counting the same water multiple times if you try and do that. And the reason that you were referred to the abstracts that are associated with this compact is that every individual water right in this compact, as with our other tribal and federal compacts, has its own quantification, as with your individual water right as well. Each individual right has a quantification either in volume, acre feet, or flow rate, cubic feet per second, along with conditions on its use. In other words, it can be used from April to October, or it has a different enforceable flow rate in the spring when runoff is higher and a lower one in the fall. So while I understand the desire for a single quantification, it simply isn't an accurate way to look at these rights.
Okay. This might be an easy one, or it might be a hard one. We'll find out. Elena wants to know, other than the sky will fall, threats of litigation, and money spent, how will Montana benefit from this compact?
Sure, and we've heard a lot about threats of litigation, and litigation is going to be the worst thing ever. That's not true. Litigation is a viable way to resolve these claims. Other states have done it. Wyoming, Idaho, Oregon is in the process of doing it. Washington has done it. It is a perfectly viable way to quantify tribal water rights.
I must say this just because you're an attorney. Of course, an attorney is going to tell us litigation is a good
well,
thing.
Sure.
Right?
I don't see anything wrong with litigation. Of course I don't. However, our legislature chose a different way, and for the reasons that I outlined at the beginning of the hour, there are advantages to negotiated settlement when we are dealing with very senior and often quite large tribal claims to water. Specifically, this compact has a lot of advantages for western Montana. In particular, the state of Montana, through the DNRC and various legislative bodies, has been trying to get a hold of water out of Hungry Horse Reservoir for a couple of decades now. We were entirely unsuccessful until we started talking about using water from Hungry Horse as part of the settlement of the water rights with these tribes. So as part of that settlement agreement, the tribes would have a water right of up to 90,000 acre-feet of water out of Hungry Horse Reservoir. Of that 90,000 acre-feet, the state would have specific control over 11,000 acre-feet, specifically for off-reservation mitigation of new domestic, commercial, municipal, and industrial uses. So as folks know who live in the lower Clark Fork and Flathead basins, it's been pretty difficult to get a new water right for some time now, not because of the tribal water rights, but because of Avista's water rights associated with the Clark Fork and Noxon dams. This additional water available out of the main stem of the Flathead and Hungry Horse Reservoir would allow new development to happen in those basins that hasn't been possible in a number of years. So that's just one example of a benefit.
And we are up against a break, so we're going to get Paul and Dave on. All our lines are full, and of course you can also make your comment and ask your question on our Facebook page. Believe it or not, we only have like 25 minutes left in the program, so we appreciate Melissa Hornbein spending so much time with us. We'll be right back. Oh, we're having a great time this morning with Melissa Hornbein on the telephone with us from Helena, and she's talking about the compact, the water rights compact that is now before the Montana legislature and has been answering questions right and left, or north and south, or whatever. So let's get back to the phones and say good morning to Paul, who's been waiting very patiently. Paul, thank you for holding. You're on with Melissa. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm a kind of a fan of the Constitution. In Article 4, Section 4, it says the United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government. Does that mean that guarantees to each citizen in the state, or is it some specified thing?
No, but Paul, is this have anything to do with the water rights compact?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So how if you would tie that together as how?
Well, the people living on the reservation, I don't know what it is now, but when I first came out here, I think figures were 75% of the population on the reservation was non-tribal. So what we're doing is saying that these citizens or residents of Montana are going to be denied their constitutional rights to a Republican form of government because they have no say in the tribal government.
Okay, so let's get an answer. Thanks for the call. So what do you think, Melissa? Does that apropos of our conversation?
I think with regard to the compact, that is not correct. As I'm sure Paul is aware, if he lives on the reservation, folks who live on an Indian reservation, in some respects, they are subject to another sovereign government. In others, they are not. There are significant protections for non-tribal residents living within the exterior boundaries of a reservation. The compact itself, as I discussed before, deals only with the quantification of the tribe's water rights, and then on the reservation fills the current regulatory void with a joint state tribal board to deal with water issues on the reservation. This is very similar to, for example, the Wildlife Management Board, that is a joint state tribal board dealing with hunting and fishing regulations on the reservation. So there's nothing unconstitutional about that. People are guaranteed the protections of the U.S. Constitution as well as the Montana Constitution, and they have state representatives on that board. In terms of larger issues of tribal government, this compact really doesn't speak to that.
Okay, let's
real quick question. Yeah. We have a question from Gloria. She wants to know, as a member of the board, are you volunteering your services, or have you been hired by the federal or state governments or the tribe? So just kind of your background. Who pays your bills?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to clarify that the Water Management Board we're talking about is an entity that is not formed and would not be formed until the compact is ratified by the state, the tribes, and the federal government. So I'm not on that board. I am an employee of the state of Montana. As I was talking to you gentlemen earlier, I work for the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. I am in their legal department, and I split my time equally acting as legal counsel for the Reserved Water Rights Compact Commission and the DNRC's State School Trust Lands Management Program. So the taxpayers pay my bills as they do with any state employee.
And when we're talking about the Water Right Commission, that's something that the legislature or the governor, I should say, set up. So you're working for the state directly through that route, right?
Yes, so in the context of these negotiations, I work for the Compact Commission, which was created not by the governor but by the legislature in 1979. It's a bipartisan body with 2 members appointed by the Speaker of the House, 2 by the President of the Senate, 4 by the governor, and 1 by the Attorney General. So that body is administratively attached to the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation.
Okay, and with that, we're time for another break. Wow, they just keep coming every 10 minutes. So Dave and Alan are waiting very patiently to visit with you, Melissa, and we appreciate your patience as well. We'll be right back. This is Talkback, and believe it or not, we are rapidly approaching 0 hour here. Melissa Hornbein joining us. Let's try to get as many calls as we can in. Dave, good morning. Thank you for holding. You're on with Melissa. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. From what I understand, treaties are written, agreements written between 2 separate countries. Now, has the Supreme Court ruled on, the Native Americans are no longer a separate country when these treaties were written? They are part of the United States. So, in my view, that treaties would cease to exist.
I've had a hard time understanding the whole sovereign nation thing as well. Please forgive my ignorance, but I also wondered about that. How does that work, Melissa?
Well, you raise a really good point, and it's particularly confusing with regard to tribes and issues of tribal government. The U.S. Supreme Court has told us not only that treaties still exist and have to be fulfilled, but that we have rules which have to dictate how we read them. In particular, we have to read them in the interest of the tribal signatory to the treaty, so we have to interpret them in favor of the tribes and as the tribes would have interpreted them at the time that they signed them. So those are our rules specifically telling us how we have to interpret treaties. What the U.S. Supreme Court has also said is that tribes have what is called a diminished sovereignty. They are sovereign governments that exist within a larger sovereign, essentially meaning that recognizing that under these treaties they ceded their what is called their aboriginal or their traditional tribal territory in exchange for the promises created by the U.S. government in the treaty. And so they have to be treated as sovereigns, but at the same time, the United States is acting as trustee for the tribes because of their diminished status. So I don't think that really probably clarified a whole lot, but that is my understanding of the way the law exists and the way it has been articulated by the U.S. Supreme Court. And the best that I can encapsulate it is that tribal sovereignty does exist according to the Supreme Court. It is a diminished sovereignty, and the tribes are under the wing. They are beneficiaries to the United States government who has to act as their trustee, and yet we still have to recognize that they are sovereign. So there are sort of conflicting rules of law that we are required to comply with, but those are the ones we operate under.
It's basically you're in control, except for you do what we say, but we're going to do it in your best interest.
Essentially, that comes pretty close to it. And,
it just sounds really...
I think we're all aware the U.S. government has gotten in trouble for the way it has acted or failed to act as a trustee on behalf of the tribe.
It just sounds really clunky to me, you know.
Yes, it's certainly...
I mean, either you're sovereign or you're not sovereign.
I wish it were that simple.
Okay, well, and for those of us who don't understand, I really appreciate the explanation. So let's move on and get Alan on the line. Good morning, Alan.
Yes, good morning. Melissa, when did the Indians file these water right claims? Where did they file them, and who for the Indians filed them?
That's a great question, Alan. So as all of the folks who are on the line and listening to this show are aware who have water rights, and probably some of the ones who don't, state-based water users, individual users of water within the state of Montana, were required to file their claims to water rights with the statewide general stream adjudication initially in 1982, and then there was a late filing deadline in 1996. If you didn't file by one of those dates, the state of Montana said, well, basically, too bad. Your water right is effectively abandoned if you didn't go through that filing process. And back in the 90s, there was a Supreme Court case in front of the Montana Supreme Court challenging that filing requirement. The Montana Supreme Court upheld it, basically saying that the only way for the state to keep this centralized system of records that's required by our Constitution is to have the filing requirement. They properly noticed it, and those were the rules. In 1979, when the legislature passed Senate Bill 76, which created the Compact Commission, they said that for the tribes and the United States in negotiations with the state of Montana, their filing deadline is stayed. They do not have to file their claims until the conclusion of negotiations. And there were several statutory filing deadlines that were amended and repealed by the legislature. They have extended the filing deadline for the tribes in the United States 4 times now. So the current filing deadline in state law is June 30th of 2015. The tribes would have to file all of their claims by then. They have not filed them yet. They are required to do so as a matter of state law if they want to have water rights within the state and if they don't have a compact. So the short answer is they will file by June 30th of this year if there's no compact. If there is a compact, those filed claims will be stayed pending tribal and federal approval of the compact, and ultimately they would be dismissed.
So how do they get original water right claims? I'm curious.
So what the U.S. Supreme Court has told us is that those water right claims are created in one of 2 ways. They are either reserved specifically by the United States through a treaty, an executive order, or an act of Congress by that reserving document that reserves land. And the document actually doesn't even need to mention the word water, the Supreme Court has told us.
That's
as long as water is necessary to fulfill the purpose of the reservation, those water rights are created.
Okay.
The other way that they're created is if by the tribes reserving their aboriginal hunting and fishing rights that they retained as of before the treaty.
Okay, tell you what, Alan, I know you've got to want to respond to that. We're going to take our last one. This is just a 1-minute break, and Alan will continue with his point. And just 8 minutes left in the programs. You have a question for Melissa? Now is the time. We'll be right back. Thanks for joining us here on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. All 3 lines are full right now. We have Melissa Hornbein joining us. And Alan, you wanted to make one more question here. Go ahead.
Just one more question, Melissa. The idea of water rights certainly didn't exist when the Hellgate Treaty was signed in 1855. When did the idea, the concept that individuals had to file water rights come into play?
You know, that's a good question, and I can't give you a specific date. I think in terms of the state system for filing of water rights, it really originated at the time of statehood, and at that point the rule was that you basically had to appropriate water and put it to beneficial use, and that gave you a water right. It wasn't until 1973 when we adopted our new Constitution and created the Montana Water Use Act that the legislature provided for this filing system and a system of centralized records, and that's also required in Article 9 of the Constitution.
Okay, let's get Catherine on. Catherine, you're on with Melissa. Go.
Okay. Did you say at the beginning of this discussion that the Supreme Court established a right of access through both private and public land for the tribes originally?
That is for tribes who have treaty language that provides them the right to access waterways off of the reservation in what is called their usual and accustomed places in common with the citizens of the territory. What the U.S. Supreme Court said in 1906 about that treaty language in a case called the United States versus Winans was that unlike you and me, the tribes have the right to access their traditional fishing grounds off of the reservation, even if in order to do so they have to cross private land.
Okay, the Aboriginal lands then, it also includes the Bitterroot Valley because that was originally, their wintering grounds. I was thinking about in real estate law, there's you can establish a public right of way by continual use, and how does that then fit in to this whole thing?
Sure. So I think that what you're talking about, and you raise a couple really good points. First of all, the Bitterroot Valley was part of the tribe's traditional Aboriginal range, and in fact, the Flathead Indian Reservation was supposed to extend down into the Bitterroot. It wasn't until about 1891 or 1892 that the tribes were removed from that portion of what was then the reservation and moved on to the current Flathead Indian Reservation. I think that the concept you're talking about is one that in legal parlance we call adverse possession.
Yeah.
And basically it can establish either a public or a private right. For example, if you have 100,000 acres of land and I go and I settle down in, say, a 5-acre corner of that land and I start farming it and I put fences around it and I don't make any secret of the fact that I'm using your land, if you don't do anything about that, if you don't tell me that I have to get out or post it as private property or in some other way enforce your property rights for a period of 5 years, I gain title to that land, and that's the concept called adverse possession.
But when you say make no secret of it, it's more than that. It has to be, I think the phrase is open and notorious. Yeah, it means everybody needs to know that you're taking advantage of the land in this way.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Catherine. I'm curious as to what your question is with regard to how adverse possession relates to traditional tribal access rights.
And keep in mind, we have 3 minutes. Go.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about if the tribal members have the right of access to both public and private land, say, for instance, along the Bitterroot, what's to stop them from establishing a common public right-of-way through adverse possession by using a driveway, for example, as a parking space and then cutting through a backyard to get to the river?
Sure. So in terms of creating a larger public right-of-way, what the Supreme Court has said is that language provides the tribes a right of access for that purpose. In this case, we're talking about traditional fisheries use. And it does not expand to non-tribal users. So even if the tribes started using it and then the general public started using it, the landowner would be entitled, and should they wish to avoid the creation of an easement across their land, they would have the duty to exclude the public. They would not have the ability to exclude the tribes under that U.S. Supreme Court precedent, but they certainly have the ability to prevent it from becoming a public right-of-way.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, we have time for one more quick call. So, Roy, go ahead. What's on your mind?
Yes. Hi, Melissa. I have a question in regards to the Bitterroot, similar to the last question, but a little different. How would the compact affect the water rights in the Bitterroot Valley?
That's a great question. As I mentioned in response to Catherine's question, that is part of the tribe's what's called their Aboriginal range. It was supposed to originally be a southern portion of the Flathead Indian Reservation. For that reason, the tribes have particularly strong legal claims to water in the Bitterroot. Under the compact, there would be no new tribal water rights quantified in the Bitterroot. The only rights they would have any ability to access in the Bitterroot are 2 storage rights out of Lake Como and I'm blanking on the name of the other reservoir, but there are 2 storage rights that Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks currently holds for fisheries and recreation use. The tribes would be added as co-owners to those rights. Nothing else about the rights would change, and they would get no independently owned in-stream flow rights with a time immemorial or other early priority date in the Bitterroot. So the Bitterroot is almost entirely protected under this compact.
Okay, one last question. You've been kind of wiggly on this one, so I want to see what you say.
Go for it.
You've said that if we go through court, that's one solution. That could be great. Or if we go through this compact process through the legislature, that could be great. Which one do you think would be best for Montana?
And you have to take into account that I do work for the Compact Commission, so professionally I support the compact. Personally, I feel that a negotiated settlement in general is almost always better than a litigated outcome, and I realize that's a little bit shocking coming from a lawyer. But in particular, in this case, I think that the negotiated settlement that we have proposed here is significantly better than a litigated outcome for a number of reasons.
And I hate to do this to you, but we're completely out of time. So